Hello, everyone, and welcome to our workshop on customer acquisition, where we will be taking you through strategies to help you in your early stage startup as you embark on that journey of acquiring your very first customers. I am absolutely delighted to bring on board my good friend Mia Bennett here, who's going to be co-hosting this workshop with me. Mia, if you'd like to introduce yourself quickly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mia. I have a mixed background of management consulting for my sins, but also quite a lot of entrepreneurship. I kind of started my own tech company quite a while ago now, and accidentally kind of fell into venture building. So ended up turning the company into a studio, building quite a lot of products, but then kind of going full circle back to the corporate world, but staying within this venture building space. Right now, I advise quite a lot of founders in the early days of their company, typically tech, typically within the first 3 or 4 years, maybe the first or second round of funding. That's sort of where I sit. So love to kind of hear more about you guys afterwards as well and answer any questions that you might have.
Lovely. Thank you, Mia, and so good to have you here with us today. So as you guys will remember, there is a chat function on the platform. So please go ahead and say hi, introduce yourself in the chat function. We'll also have the opportunity at the end for you to ask any questions that you might have after the presentation. But on top of that, what we'll do is we'll keep an eye on this questions tab where you should put any questions you have as we go. And we'll try and answer them on the fly. And there's also this poll functionality, but we won't be using any polls today. All right, in terms of the agenda, what will we be covering over the course of this workshop? So we'll introduce you to the ACEs methodology, which will become clear shortly. But that ACEs methodology to help you get a community of engaged customers. Mia will then take you through 7 strategies to help you, if you're a B2C or a business-to-consumer business, to help you find your very first consumers. But then we've got you. If you're a B2B business, fear not. We'll have a short section at the end around how those strategies might apply if you are trying to acquire businesses as opposed to individual consumers. And then finally, last but certainly not least, we'll be talking you through why cash flow is king and the importance of cash flow when it comes to your customer acquisition in the early stages, but even as you grow and start to scale. So first off, the ACEs methodology. The ACEs methodology, which is a methodology that I came up with. Originally, it was just a triangle, the A, the C, and the E. But over time, we've adapted this, and it's now the ACEs methodology with the S at the end. And again, this will help you get those engaged customers. So the A actually stands for audience. So building your audience, first and foremost. And I'm hoping you can see this. Yes, you can. Great. The C stands for community. And as you know, here at Underdog, we are super community-led. And we'll talk more about what that means in a second. And then the E stands for engagement. And this used just to be an ace triangle, but it's now a diamond, as we talked about. And the S stands for sales. So actually making money from your community. So when we talk about audience, we always start with the audience first. And as you guys know, in your value propositions, audience comes at the very beginning. Who is it that you are helping to achieve that desired outcome? So we start with the audience. But for the purposes of this particular presentation, we're not going to dwell on it. So we are going to cover elements of how to build for B2C and B2B. But actually, for now, let's assume you've already identified and built that audience. What do we do with them next? So next, we actually need to bring them into our orbit. So we've identified that audience, we've maybe captured some leads, but we can't leave it at that. So what we like to do here at Underdog is to bring that audience into a community. And there are various third-party platforms that you can use. Facebook, WhatsApp, you can use Spotify if you've got a podcast, you can create a YouTube channel, you can have a Twitter account that people follow. All of these are third-party community platforms that we can use and tap into. But what might be some of the problems of using these third-party platforms? The first problem, and the main problem, is fundamentally that you are then reliant on those platforms. So in an ideal world, we need to not just have an audience that sits on these platforms, but we need to own that audience ourselves. If you, as an example, get blocked off Twitter or get shut down from Facebook, or your YouTube channel gets disabled because you've had a copyright complaint against you, all of these things, by the way, have happened to people that I know. And that is your only source of contacting your audience. You are dead in the water. So in an ideal world, we want to migrate these individuals onto a native platform that we own. So we own those eyeballs. But once we've got them onto that platform, then we need to engage that audience. And the example I often give here is that if Brad Pitt walked into my front room, other than being a bit shocked, I might start talking to him and saying, "Hey man, how's it going? Holy smokes." Because I feel like I know him. But I only feel like I know him, even though he doesn't know me at all. And for those of you who've had the one-to-one calls with me over the course of this week, it has been quite funny, right? Because you probably feel like you've been getting to know me over the course of these past few weeks, but we've never actually met. So what we need to do is create that same sense of affinity and rapport and, kind of like friendship almost with our audience. And this equation here, the 7, 11, and 4, which normally I get you guys to guess what they are, but in the interest of time, we're going to push through. The 7, 11, and 4 equation is something that I've stolen off someone else, essentially. And these are not scientific numbers, but they are broad brush kind of directional numbers that you need to think about. And the 7 stands for 7 hours worth of content. 7 hours worth of content that your audience within your community can interact with you, even if it's just a one-way thing. And in 11 different times. So if you just had one 7-hour-long multi-feature film video of you talking, they're probably not going to interact with you or feel that same sense of affinity as they might if they were able to tap into you in different ways at different times. So 7 hours worth of content, 11 different types of content on 4 different platforms. So they're building that affinity with you, not just seeing you on YouTube, but maybe you're popping up on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and maybe you've got a WhatsApp group with them as well. So that's going to build that really strong connection with your audience. And down here, we've got listen, read, and watch. So again, if we go back, if I can go back, to this community platforms page, you'll notice these are a mix of kind of written words, like WhatsApp and Facebook. Facebook, of course, you can also have video, but Spotify is audio. YouTube is clearly video. So different people learn in different ways. So if we can engage with them across different media, we're going to have a better chance of creating that connection with them. And then finally on this piece, how do we measure engagement? So when it comes to a B2C business, we're thinking about that stickiness. How long are those individual consumers sticking with your business? And on top of that, let's think about brand loyalty as well. Because as we've already discussed, it is very possible that a competitor can come in and essentially rip off your idea. But one way of defending that, of creating a moat around your business, is to actually build that connection with your customers, so they're not just customers, but they're part of the family. And they feel that deep loyalty to you and your brand, and they will only buy in this particular market from you. So that's for B2C. And B2B, also very similar. Great. So for B2C, we're thinking about stickiness and brand loyalty, but B2B, we're thinking about similar stuff, but it's more around kind of customer success. So can you deliver on that desired outcome for your business customers? Because if you can't, they're going to drop away. And then some of the other things that we need to think about are the lifetime value of that customer over the course of your relationship with them versus your CAC, or your cost of acquiring that customer. And ballpark, we like LTV, or lifetime value, to be at least 3 times CAC. And we'll talk more about that at the end. And then finally, any upsells or cross-sells that you can use to monetize those customers. And finally, whether your customer is a consumer or a business, we're always going to be asking for referrals. We've talked about that forever. Mia, it's over to you.
Okay. My lovely friends, we are going to talk a little bit about finding your very first customers. So one thing I want to do a little mini explanation here. Normally when we think about finding customers or marketing or any of these type of activities, we are thinking about when our company is already established, we already know who our customers are, we're already out and about. I'm not going to talk about that. So I'm not talking about long-term kind of when we are mainstream marketing. I'm really kind of coming back to the early days. I'm talking about your very first 100 or 200 customers. So really, how do you really start? That's kind of what we're going to talk about today. In the chat, I wanted to see if we have time, maybe you can put in the chat very quickly how you think you might find your very first customers. I'm going to give you literally 5 seconds if you can see the screen and if it all works. Facebook groups, Reddit's awesome. Social media, great. Insta, let's get one more idea. Anybody? Really first customers? Okay. Let me... email. Good, Dan. Excellent. Guys, friends, friends and family. Guys, this is excellent. Okay. So, even though we might think that marketing is a very complicated path where it's really hard to find the very first customers, I have some good news that there are really 7 strategies. Yeah. So we don't really need to reinvent the wheel. There are 7 ways we can do this, and we'll go through these. So you don't need to do too many things. You just need to pick 1 or 2 that kind of make sense for you and your business. So I'm going to go one by one. In case the screen is not moving forward, let me know because it might have got stuck. Okay. As some of you mentioned already, the very first strategy is through your network. That's like your friends, family, colleagues, anybody that you know. Second, you need to recruit strangers. We'll talk about this a little bit more. You can go to where people already are. Like somebody suggested, hey, like Facebook groups, Reddit, these are existing groups. We can leverage influencers, get press, create viral content, and we kind of will mention that. And finally, get physical placement. Now, we're going to look into them one by one. Okay. Finding your customers through your friends and network. I don't know if anybody here knows who Paul Graham is. I really like this tweet that he has sent. By the way, in case you don't know him, he is quite an influential figure and you would really enjoy his essays. I really recommend. But this is basically what this tweet says. When you first start a startup, you don't need to get the word out. You need to get the word in. You don't need, in the very beginning, the whole universe to kind of know about what you're doing. What you need is to find an initial group of early adopters, which you can probably find amongst your peers. This is a very, very common thing to do. So let's look at it in a little bit more in practice. This is super useful strategy if whatever it is that you're working on makes sense for a lot of people. Yeah. If you're doing something like super niche, maybe your friends might not be the right customers. But if you're doing something that generally would be relevant for a lot of people, that's a good way to go. And you kind of need to make sure that your friends are very, very similar to the niche that you're going after. For example, LinkedIn, when they originally started, they really effectively were a CV site. And they just reached out to their own network to get people to register. And because a lot of their network was basically professional people, they ended up getting 3,000 people signed up before they even started. So this is what we mean. In the early days, go through your network. Okay. Second, you want to go and recruit people. So on the right, I have a picture here of the site that Uber has for drivers. So for example, if you want to become a driver with Uber, you go to their site, you fill out a bunch of forms, there you go. They have effectively got a new driver. In the early days though, nobody knew about them. Nobody will randomly go to a website. So they had to go out to effectively find those drivers. So what they did in the early days, which is this image, this is a very, very early product. They literally had to go to the taxi. There weren't even offices. Literally, they went to airports. They talked to the taxi drivers one by one and effectively recruited them. So it's possible that if you just have a beautiful site out there, you're hoping for people to arrive, they might not. You might need to figure out where are they that you can go and recruit them. In the early days, that's really important. Now, this is especially relevant if you are thinking about setting up a marketplace. And what do I mean by marketplaces? Anything where you have supply and demand, like Airbnb, like Etsy, all of these things where you have two sides. Each of those people that you bring are super, super valuable. Why? Because if somebody comes on your, let's say, Airbnb to rent their flat, they're not going to do it once. They might do it literally for years and years and years. So their lifetime value is huge. So it completely makes sense to put the extra effort in to go and recruit them. So it's relevant for these type of businesses. Like each user that you recruit is highly valuable. Number 3, go where they are. This is something that's, I think, very intuitive. The image I have here is the early version of Netflix. I don't know if any of you guys even remember those days, pretty old. But the way that Netflix started originally, they basically ended up going on these old school forums where a lot of movie buffs were hanging out, and they started contributing a lot. So effectively, I don't want to say they pretended to be one of them, but they effectively became part of that community of people who love talking about films and movies. And that's how they kind of opened that niche for themselves. This is really useful, this strategy, if there is really already a community. Yeah, if you need to build something from scratch, this is not probably the right thing to do. But if there is already a Facebook group, a Reddit group, some sort of forum already existing, and you have something to add to the conversation, this is a strategy for you. So you can't just turn up and just sell, or say, hey, I have this awesome company, come and buy it. People will not like that. But if you can be part of that group and really contribute to the community, the sales will eventually come. So this is a really good strategy for this particular case. Next one is going through influencers. Again, this is a strategy that Instagram used. It seems like such an obvious thing today that obviously Instagram will start with influencers. But back in the day, there wasn't such a thing. I don't know if you remember early days of Instagram, like nobody cared, nobody knew about them, and we didn't really have even this phrase. What they did, they effectively went to people they knew who were very popular, who were really into photography. In fact, they reached out to a lot of photographers also just to get the word out there. So if we learn anything from this strategy is that you got to know some influencers ahead of time. Again, if you need to build that network from scratch, it might be a little bit tough, but if you know already people who are influencers, and you can get them really excited about whatever it is that you're doing, this is a strategy for you to think about. If not, it might be a little bit tough for your early customers. Yeah, maybe as a strategy where you're going to spend money might still work for you. But your first 100 where you're trying to do things for free, this will not work. Okay, 5, get press. Press is a really interesting one because typically if you manage to get press, you'll get a big jump, and then very quickly you'll disappear. So you want to be very careful with it. The story I have here for you is the story of, again, Airbnb. You can tell that I really like Airbnb. I don't know if you've ever come across these. They basically, at some point, they had this crazy idea that people will rent mattresses from them. So air mattresses, this is actually where the name comes from. And they really targeted a conference, a political conference. And they did, to get the word out there, they created these cereal boxes. And what happened was these cereal boxes were just so newsworthy that a lot of different channels, blogs, websites covered them. And they actually ended up running out of the Obama cereal that they had, and they ended up making enough money to kind of keep the company going. But they really did this through something that was really newsworthy, was kind of very different. It was something outside the usual. So when would this really work? It really works if you have a good story. And remember, a lot of times we all think our company is awesome and has a really great story, but I want you to be very objective. Of course, our company is interesting to us, but would it really be interesting to a journalist, or would it be interesting to a reader or a listener? So I really want you to kind of stay away from this bias that we all have. And it would not hurt if we already know some journalists. There are already networks out there, so you can potentially find them. But if you know a couple of people who can help you, that is not a bad thing. Okay. Do you guys know who Mr. Beast is? I'm guessing yes. Or I hope yes. In case you don't know, yes. So he is one of the biggest YouTubers. But what is really interesting about him is that not only he does the YouTube stuff, he also has quite a lot of different merchandises, from the typical things that people do as merchandise, like t-shirts and stuff, but actual big brands of on chocolate. And I think he might even have the record for it right now. But the story I want to tell you is about the burger company that he started. I don't know if you guys know about this story. He basically started like something insane, like 200 burger shops at the same time, like something insane. And he ended up going to one of them. It wasn't some like random mall. About 10,000 people turned up for the opening of that little burger shop. The reason he could do this was because he was already quite a big name. He already was Mr. Beast. Like, if I do that, nobody will show up. Like 3 people will show up. So he managed to create this really viral content to get people to react because he already had, thanks Mike, because he already had this fan going. So this particular strategy, and it's really, really tough, like creating viral content is really hard, but it really works if you already have that community or that audience here. In bracket, guys, if you're already thinking about building a company, it's not a bad idea, even though you might be like maybe a year out from launching anything. It might not be a bad idea to start thinking about, and you really create your own community or audience, because it will help with so many of these things. The second thing, you got to have a little bit of an edge as a creator. Yeah. So if you wanted to create some sort of a viral content, regardless of what format it is, you got to know how to do that in a really nice, professional way, whether it's audio, video, images. That will certainly help. Okay, last but not least is physical placement. Okay, physical placement is a bit of a weird one because it almost never works. It's a little bit random, yeah. The example I have for you is from a company called Grubhub, which is effectively Deliveroo in the US. Now, they started the company, the founders, when they were still at university. And, you know, like all students, no money, no ideas. And they really tried to get their company out there. They just couldn't get any interest. So what they ended up doing, they kind of did a bit of a hustle. So they kind of went to all the restaurants and they saw that the restaurants all had these really nice stickers everywhere. But of course, they didn't have money for stickers. So, and also they didn't really have a company between you and I. So what they ended up doing is kind of, I think they asked a university or a friend of theirs to print these for free or really, really cheaply, these little open signs. And they basically distributed them freely to all these restaurants. And the restaurants were like, "Ooh, a nice open or close sign, perfect." And they just started using it because of the open close thing. And that kind of was the way that they first got their name out there and started getting some people registering on their website. So a bit of a hustle, a bit of a creative solution. This really works for stuff, for ideas where your customers are local. Yeah. If your customers are not local and you can't really count on that footfall, physical placement might not be the right thing for you. In fact, I don't know if you know the story. Tinder, in the original version, they also did something similar. They literally started wearing those sandwich boards and they started walking in different colleges and basically asking people if I think they showed some pictures to people saying, "Hey, do you think this person is hot or not?" So they did that hot or not game, but in a physically way. But that could have only worked because for dating, you got to have people really close to each other. So the geography is actually a main point of it. So These type of ideas really work if you can hustle, if you can be creative, and you have this local link. Okay, but let me give you a mini shortcut. I mean, not always, but if you think about what is a default path, first, start with friends and colleagues. So literally think about what is the most immediate and closer thing to you. Start from there and go circle by circle, go out. So default path. Let's start with our networks. Let's go where our customers are, and that could be online or offline, doesn't matter. So you want to go and recruit them. And third, let's see if we can find some influencers who will really fall in love with whatever it is that we're offering. So these three are like a really nice standard thing. Obviously, this is not the same for every single company, but it's a good starting point. It's a good rule of thumb. Let me give you a few tiny best practices or things to take away. Remember, we don't really need to do too many crazy things. They're just 7 strategies. Pick one. In the early days, you really need to probably go and recruit people one by one. So we don't need anything overly complex. Now, I know I have repeated this already a few times, but I really want to repeat it again. Guys, pick one strategy, maybe 2. Pick one, get really good at it. Keep testing, keep figuring out what version of that particular strategy or what plan or tactic would work within that strategy. If it really doesn't work, okay, let's go to something else. If not, keep working it. Become the best that you can within that particular strategy. Don't spread yourself thin. This is a mistake that a lot of founders make, that they try too many things. Get good at one thing, test it rigorously, you will figure it out. Okay, this is a bit of an obvious one. The more directly we can go to the users, the better. Absolutely. In the early days, we want to go and find them. We want to actually know who they are, right? Because they can also help us with some of the other things. Now, the key to success, whatever the strategy is, doesn't matter. The key to success is that you really, really, really want to know who is your niche. Yeah. So for example, if we are thinking about going after customers who are students, who are in this particular age group, you kind of want to make it even more niche, make it more specific. This will help you with finding your customers. And finally, remember, a lot of these tactics that are useful for your first 1,000 customers will not be useful for the first 10,000. Yeah, we really need different strategies for different stages. That is normal. That is okay. Don't worry, in the early days, almost anything that you do are not scalable things. Don't be scared by that. This is completely normal. Do things that don't scale. You will figure things out through that. And that is me. Any questions so far? If not, I'm going to hand it over to Mike.
Good stuff. Thank you, Mia. And guys, remember, you can ask any questions in the relevant tab. And we'll save time at the end as well. Cool. So if you're a B2B business, it might be slightly different. So we'll take you through the differences. Can you guys see my screen? Okay, good stuff. Thank you. I'm not quite sure why it's not quite working for me. All right, excellent stuff. So if you're a B2B business, slightly different. And the best slide that I've ever seen in a pitch deck for a B2B business looked something like this. And this will be perfectly aligned with the second half of the program, where we are going out and we are testing our value proposition with the market. And the slide looks a little something like this. So by the end of the program, hopefully, you might not have pilot customers, but you've at least got people within your orbit. So you've got that audience and you've pulled them within your community and you're engaging with them. So actual customers that you have trialed your service or solution with, or at least presented your value proposition to them, and they've said, yes, you know what, I'm interested. So that's fantastic. Once you're up and running and you've got an actual minimum viable product or a prototype out there, then ideally we want those customers to be paying customers. So that will come more at the end of the 6-month program. So real paying customers on the far left. Then we've got our engaged pipeline. So these are the people that we've actually reached out to and who have said, yeah, you know what, I'm interested. So they have expression of interest at the end there. So we've not yet engaged with them. We've not yet pulled them in to our actual solution, and we've not had them using it, but they've said, yeah, you know what, I'm interested. And then we need to show that we, especially if we're looking to get VC investment, we need to show that we have got massive potential. So that's our total SOM, or serviceable obtainable market. So the entire universe of customers that we think we could obtain and service with our restrictions. So you can kind of show this to show what you've achieved so far. Because remember, here at Underdog, we believe in what you do, not what you say you're going to do. But you've also got to sell us the dream as well, right? So what have you done so far? Who have you captured? And who could you potentially go out and capture? So think about it like that. And of course, this is going to come, there's going to be so much data, right? That you're going to have to track this in a measurable way, particularly in a B2B scenario. And remember, Rome was not built overnight. This is going to take time. You're going to have to knock on many, many doors. You're going to have to be persistent and ultimately resilient. And you're going to have to learn, guys, to take no for an answer and actually to smile at rejection, because rejection is a relief. Rejection means, thank you very much, I can move on. And maybe I'll come back to you at a later stage, but for now, I can move on to something new. Yep, kiss many frogs, like I mentioned, knock on many doors, and try again, absolutely. But the most important thing is to record everything that you are doing, so that if you do have positive leads, you can know when and how to follow up. And you'll create, and we'll go through this in more detail at the relevant stage, but you'll create this pipeline or this funnel that you are putting prospects through and engaging with them at various stages in your pipeline. And there are tons of tools available like HubSpot and Pipedrive. And if this is relevant to you and you are running a B2B sales process, reach out to us because we can get you deals with some of these tools. And then finally, guys, a quick conversation about cash flow. And cash flow is king. And this guy, Ryan Dice on the left, a long-time internet entrepreneur, he says it best. And he says, he or she who can afford to spend the most to acquire a new customer will win. And you remember way back on the previous slide, we talked about LTV, or lifetime value of that customer, and how that must be greater than your cost of acquiring that customer and really of servicing that customer. The more that you can charge your customers, the more you can afford to spend on acquiring those customers, which means ultimately you're going to win the day. And this often, by the way, guys, is why fast-growing tech companies will reach out to VCs for VC funding, because actually the cost of acquiring that customer is too great for them. If they were just to run on cash in the bank, they'd run out of money and they wouldn't be able to survive. So they raise capital to accelerate that ability to acquire new customers and to overpay, essentially, to get new customers into their community and to keep them engaged and eventually to sell to them. And once they've got them in there, they're hoping that over time, economies of scale and other benefits will arrive, which means that the cost of servicing that customer will go down. And then again, remember, referrals. The referrals they'll get off the back of those existing customers that they have delighted, so that those customers feel that brand affinity and that loyalty to them and say, yeah, you know what? Now that you mention it, there are 5 other people in my network who could benefit from your solution. So then they acquire one customer, but from that one customer, they've actually acquired 5 more simply by delighting them. So cash flow is king, ladies and gentlemen. Look, I want to leave time for questions. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. And these questions can be to me or to Mia about anything we've talked about today. And they can also be about the module that we are covering this week, which is identifying your audience and ultimately narrowing down to that ideal customer profile, that single most important customer to you. That if you get them on board, it's going to mean your business will be a success. How do you narrow down your niche? If you've got any thoughts on this, Mia, that you'd like to share.
Guys, whatever we always come up with is always too broad. When you think it's niche, you can always go more niche. So I think the trick is pick something that you think is a niche, do some customer discovery, have some conversations, you will see that the responses that people give are a bit too random. That will tell you a little bit better how you should be dividing them. And typically, you want to think about obviously demographic stuff like, okay, age, location, all of these type of things. But really, I recommend also think about motivations and what is the outcome that people are looking for. Because for the same problem, different groups might be looking for a very, very different outcome. Yeah, and they might be very different looking, at least on the surface. But in reality, they are the customer for the same kind of solution, for this solving the same problem. So really worth thinking about this different dimension of the outcome.
Thanks, Mia. And I'd echo a lot of that. And essentially, don't think too much about going out and searching for your niche. Your niche will find you. And you will see, as Mia discussed, but in modules 4 and 5, where you are going out there and you are talking to your customers, they are naturally going to fall into different groups. And you will be able, in module 6, when we start mapping out those pain points, to identify exactly which of the many people that you've gone out and spoken with actually best match your specific solution to that desired outcome that they're seeking. So why do I say that your niche will find you? And how else might we think about this? There was a really cool concept that I came across recently, and we've all heard about minimum viable products, or MVPs. But actually, this is the MVS, or the minimum viable segment. And that is that one specific customer, which is why we get you to narrow down from your universe of audience personas down to one specific ideal customer profile over the course of this module. So that one specific individual, that minimum viable segment, that you can take your minimum viable product or your desired outcome to address. And the best example, and Simon's asked here, he said, thanks, can you share any interesting examples? So actually there was one example on the call today that I had with Bishoy, who was looking at essentially the helping people achieve early retirement by financial solutions. So saving and investing and all the rest of it. And I said to him, well, look, what universe of people could you help? And the answer is actually, it could be almost anyone. Well, I said to him, from the perspective of this particular exercise, let's take as an example, someone like a new grad. They've just graduated from university and they've just started getting a paycheck. They're in their early 20s and they're not earning a lot. How you could help them might be the same outcome, right? The same desired result, which might be, I'm going to retire in 10 years. But how you help them, their needs, their ability to save a chunk of their income, their propensity for risk might be very different than someone who is more senior in their career and is earning a lot more, but now has got a family to support. They've got dependents. So maybe their desired outcome is higher, but their ability to save is higher, as an example. Versus someone who is in their 60s and is maybe getting ready to retire in 5 years and has got some money in the bank, but not a lot. How might their propensity for risk be different than someone right at the start of their career? So the answer is your solution, which could be tailored financial advice, might be, it's the same kind of platform, the same solution that you're providing these 3 different personas. But the actual end result, the nuances of it are going to be very, very different. And as you start going out to the market and doing your customer discovery and working with these individuals who might fit into one bucket, which is people in the UK who want to retire within 10 years, you'll actually start to understand the different ways in which you can help them and the differences in their specific needs. And then you can start mapping them and you'll see them. You'll see it as you start getting more and more results from your customer discovery. They'll start to cluster. And then you can take a view as to which cluster you want to address first. Because again, in the same way as with an MVP, a minimum viable product, we don't do 101 different things. We ideally want to do one specific thing until we find that product market fit. And we know that what we're doing is a good fit for what the market needs. Similarly, with your minimum viable segment, you don't want to be trying to help all people with all things. How you help one specific individual, if you've got tons of different people in different clusters, your product, your solution is going to be going in all different directions to try and address all their needs. But if you pick one cluster, one specific cluster, then you can actually find that that minimum viable segment takes you down a linear route, a little bit like Mia was talking about earlier. What markers would I use to validate if the particular acquisition strategy I'm using is working? I.e., when should I try the next one, or should I just keep going until I get traction? So, Mia, do you want to kick off with that?
Sure. Whenever we're picking a thing, whatever that thing is to do, I want you guys to start thinking of it as an experiment. Yeah. If you remember back in the day from school, you want to have a very scientific approach almost. So you want to start with, what is it that we're assuming would work? So imagine I might say, okay, I think if I go through my network, that would be a super awesome thing. Yeah. So I have some sort of high level belief. I then want to break that down into very specific assumptions. Yeah. So I might say, okay, I think if I actually reach out to my network and I tell them about this particular thing I'm doing, they'll be interested, for example. But then I want to test this to make sure I'm on the right path. Yeah. So I will define a test. So I will say, okay, this will be true, for example, if I send 1,000 emails or 100 emails, or 50 people get back to me. So I will define a very particular test. I will run the test, get the data, and then I will analyze the data and ask myself, why did I get this data? So even if the data comes back and is bad, I'm not going to give up yet. Yeah. I might say, okay, maybe I didn't get the 50 emails I wanted because maybe I need a better copy, or maybe I need to contact another 50. Yeah. So I will run the test again. So what you will see is a very iterative approach. You will get to a place where, frankly, you have done a bunch of these tests and you might say, no, like I've tried a bunch of different things. Nothing has worked. It's time to change the higher level assumption. And then you go through the process again. What actually happens in practice, that at some point you will see that some things will start to click. Yeah. And then it will give you a little bit of that sign for traction. Then you kind of go down that rabbit hole and then you will figure things out. But don't give up too quickly. You kind of want to keep going and keep testing. And if it doesn't work, but in a systematic way, okay, try something else. But don't jump between them because you're not going to get the right answer the first time. On average, guys, when you define tests, I mean, it's a little bit early for you, perhaps, but generally 9 out of 10, they don't work. So this is like part of the norm. You got to keep going until you figure out and you're really confident that this is not the right path. Yeah, so that's when you can switch.
And I think that there is a happy balance, right, between being ultra focused to the, to the stage of insanity, where you are flogging a dead horse essentially, and being spread so thinly that your limited resources, particularly as solo founders, just mean that you're not doing a good job at anything. And if you've got a scanner personality like I do, you naturally want to try new things. I love doing it. So I've got to be ultra focused and say to myself, oh, look, you know what, like Mia was saying, it doesn't need to be just one strategy. You can A/B test 2 different strategies at the same time, right? This is not a hard and fast rule, but what we're saying is don't spread yourselves too thinly. So actually go out and try different things. And sometimes, guys, you do need to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, right? That does need to happen. But we need to be analyzing everything. We need to be tracking that data, tracking those hard metrics, and figuring out what works and what doesn't. And as a tiny small example, right, you can take one very specific acquisition strategy, which might be Facebook advertising. And you might create an ad, put it up there, send it out, and you get no results. And you go, you know what? Facebook advertising, absolute junk. What a waste of time and money. It just doesn't work. Does the platform not work? Or is it actually how you have approached it that hasn't worked? And there were so many moving parts. And this is why we always talk, guys, about being that mad scientist in the lab, mixing up different potions, because sometimes purely by accident, you can figure out that something works that no one else has ever tried or tested. So you need to be like that mad scientist and try different things. And as a granular example, with Facebook ads, you can change the demographic that you're targeting. You could change the headline that your ad has. You could change the creative, so the pictures, the videos, the carousels that you have. You could have a product-led kind of creative. You could have a lifestyle-led creative. You could have an outcome-led creative. You could try all different types of creatives to see what works. You can try different messaging, so not just the headline, but the actual messaging. You can try different calls to actions, learn more, buy now, join, explore, whatever. There are different kind of set call to actions that you can have. And most importantly, sometimes, and this is what Mia's getting at, sometimes you need to say, yeah, you know what, we've tried different things, we need to change the platform itself. And maybe exactly the same creative and same targeting and same everything else will work better on Instagram than Facebook, or on TikTok than LinkedIn. So again, we need to be experimenting, and we need to be trying to prove ourselves wrong. And failure is great, right? Because it gives us data points that says, right, let's stop doing that and let's try something else. But the point is, don't throw in the towel just because your first go doesn't work.
Give a random example, kind of following this line of the story that sometimes it's really hard to predict what actually works. Guys, many years ago, I built a product that we had like a really very strict kind of launch plan for it. We had like PR lined up. Anyway, we launched it in the US, and based on our PR story kind of doing its thing, doing okay. Suddenly, we ended up having like this huge spike in France. And we're like, what is happening? We did nothing. We did absolutely nothing in France. And specifically in Paris. So very concentrated. And it turned up, like I was obsessed figuring out why are we suddenly becoming really successful in Paris. And by the way, it was an English app, so it wasn't even in French. And you know how in Europe, they kind of like their own language. So what happened was like somebody, like literally some random blogger had written something about it on a random Paris thing, like a really niche random blog, all in French. They had just mentioned it because they kind of, we had some sort of a funny link to something French and they had talked about it and suddenly people had picked it up. It was just such an unpredictable thing. And this had happened to us a few times as we have launched products, that suddenly you become really popular unpredictably in random markets. And this kind of goes both ways. Yeah, so you could have some positive examples, or the other way around where you really, really plan, you're really specific, and like customers just don't care. So don't give up, keep trying different things.
I really like that. And I'm going to give a similar example, but from a consumer products business that I've got, which sells outdoor adventure camping gear. Very, very similar, actually. We saw a massive spike at one point from Australian customers, orders from Australian customers. I was like, right, let me get to the bottom of this. Now, this shows you the importance of tracking everything. So we'd set up all the analytics and all the tracking tools so we could trace back where that spike of traffic had come from. And we could see it was coming from one specific YouTube video, which one individual had in Australia had created because they loved our gear. So that one individual, and it goes back to referrals and all the rest of it and delighting your customers, that one individual had spiked our traffic in Australia. And then again, word started to spread. And that's still probably, so UK biggest, North America second, Australia third for us. More so than Europe as an entire region, by the way, solely off the back of that, because that one customer led to more, which led to more, which led to more. But again, track everything, guys. Because if you're not tracking from day one, it's too late, right? That ship has sailed. If we had not already set up those analytics, I couldn't have gone back in time and tried to figure out where that traffic had come from. So you do need to track and keep on top of this stuff. There's one more question in here, which Bishop I put in the chat, which was, how long should I be engaging in, as an example, Facebook groups or any other community before I start offering my own products and services? I've got some thoughts, but Mia, why don't you go ahead first?
I'm curious to see what you think, Mike. Okay, this is my particular approach. If you're selling something that is a solution to a problem, we can kind of mention it, but I think my specific approach would be not to ever sell it directly in a community or in a group. My approach would be to contribute, get to know people a little bit, and then almost build a one-to-one relationship, especially if I'm really early on. Yeah, if I'm really early on, I will kind of mention, say, oh yeah, like my new good friend, I get that you have this kind of headache. I've been thinking about it. I'm thinking about doing something about this headache. Do you fancy a chat? And I really would try to kind of migrate from like a random chatty thing in a forum or in a community to a conversation. So effectively, I will use them for customer development. I will turn them effectively to my customer as I go on the journey with them. And then eventually I'll say, do you remember that conversation we had about that thing that you helped me? You gave me some good inputs. By the way, do you want to be one of my first testers? And then I will kind of go from there. Because I think otherwise it might be a little bit jarring. This is my personal approach. I'm not saying this is the way that it should be done. I just like to be super softy with these things.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've seen 3 strategies work really, really well in Facebook groups specifically, but other communities as well. And creating that one-to-one connection, absolutely key, right? The group owner, as an example, if we take Underdog as an example, right? If we got service providers flooding our community with spam, essentially, unsolicited sales messages, guess what's going to happen to them? They are going to get banned and blacklisted immediately, right? That is one of our rules of engagement, because that's not good for us. It's not good for you guys. It's not good for the community as a whole. The only person that is potentially good for is that salesperson. So that is a bad thing in general, right? Just to be spamming groups with your sales message. But if you are able to take that one-to-one relationship offline, so away from the wider community, that's absolutely fine, right? Because you built that relationship. So that's tactic number 1, that one-to-one selling, essentially. Particularly if you have identified that you have a solution to the desired outcome that specific individual has vocalized on that group. You're helping them, right? You're offering them your services. And like Mia was saying, there's different ways that you can kind of approach that. You don't need to say, hey, I've got this product or service, buy it from me. You can say, hey, I think I could help you. I've got a trial group going on. Would you like to come in for free? Or I'd love to offer you a discount or sell the return or whatever. There's different ways that you can soften that message rather than direct sales. So the one-to-one thing. Secondly, and this is a bit kind of dark hat, but I have seen growth marketers who will create profiles, like a variety of profiles, infiltrate these groups on your behalf, and then rather than selling your own product, you have third parties who are going, oh yeah, you know what, I tried this particular product or service, it worked really well for me. So again, it's that social proof. Now, I'm not saying go out and do these kind of dark hat tactics, but if you think back to delighting your customers, that's where that kind of referral or peer-to-peer referral element comes in. Because if you can naturally help individuals on a one-to-one basis, and then they are already in these groups and communities, they're going to know other people who are suffering from similar problems to them or who have similar desired outcomes, and you want them to be your advocates. You want that halo effect to start happening, whereby they come on board and they become your best salespeople. So always focus on that customer success piece. And then thirdly and finally, I think just by being in these communities and contributing, very often you can put taglines. So it won't just be, hey, it's Mike. It will be Mike, founder of Underdog. Or it could be in your signature. I often see that on forums and on posts. Or even on email newsletters, it might be, here's a ton of value, here's a ton of free content. By the way, if you think I could help you in any other way, these are the 3 different ways that I can help you. With one-to-one calls, with products and services, or by joining my community. But because you are giving before you are asking, you kind of slip through the net a little bit, right? Don't try it on Underdog, guys. We'll shut you down. But it can be a really nice way of, giving and then getting in return. That is it. All right, guys. If there are no final questions, I think we're almost on time. Thank you so much again, Mia, for coming on board.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
No, my pleasure. And if you're happy to share your LinkedIn or whatever, if people want to connect with you and figure out more, feel free to do that in the chat. Otherwise, I can share it on your behalf on the community. But it's so refreshing, guys. I'm sure you agree. So refreshing to have a different voice. It's not just me and Steve. You get different perspectives. And we'll be trying to bring other subject matter experts on board over the course of the rest of the program.